Okay, so in the previous video, I went through the player class. I described a little bit about, well, a lot about how it implements mouse listener. I described each of the variables for the player, all the instance variables. Notice none of those are static, so each player is going to have its own. I described how all dice works and the constructor where it's all initialized. I described how scorecard is full works, which is used by the game to determine if the game is over or if it's a player's turn, whether or not to skip that player. Because say some players who have their scorecard full and others don't, it needs to skip the ones whose cards are full and get to the ones that are not. So let's go over the paint method. So the first thing we do is we get the font from the graphics object and we derive a new font that is bigger, 30 pixels high. Because on the scorecard we want to draw our text big, and we set our font to that new bigger font. We set the color to black because we want to draw all of our text in black. And then we go through all the scores in the upper section. And notice we start at 1 because we're ignoring the 0 index. There is no way for a die to roll a 0, so there is no 0 section. But every array starts at index 0, so we're just going to go ahead and ignore that one. And we go I equals 1, I less than 7, so we go through this loop for indexes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. If the upper section sub I is not equal to -1, so we're not going to do this if it stores a -1. So only for places in the array where we have set the score to some other value. Remember, we initialized them to -1. We're going to draw a string, draw a piece of text. And so the double quotes is an empty string. When we add that to something that's an int, upper section sub I will evaluate to an int because upper section is an array of ints. When we add a string to an int, it'll convert the int to a string. And so by adding it to the empty string, this creates a string whose characters are equal to the characters that are stored in that int. So it's just converting the int to a string. This is the x value. So each column is 70 pixels wide, and 270 is the left edge of the first column. Or, well, it's just a little bit to the right of that because we don't want our numbers buttered all the way up against the left edge. And my index, so if the index is 0, we end up in that first column, and if it's 1, we're 70 pixels to the right of that, which is the next column, and so on. And then I is going to be the row. So every category in the upper section is 34 pixels apart, and I just measured those. You know, I did a little trial and error and adjusted these numbers until I got it to work right. It's not always good, well, it's usually bad, to just type numbers in code. Usually it's better to have a variable up top, some sort of a private static or some sort of a final int or something. That way in your code you could refer to it by name. But I was a little bit lazy. You notice I've got a whole bunch of 34s in here. I really should have created a variable that said something like row height and a variable column width or something like that, and use those variables, set the row height to 34 and the column width to 70. But oh well. So the y value, the top of the first category is at 53. So it's at 53 plus 34. Remember, the smallest I value is 1. So when I is 1, we end up at 50, 60, 70, 87. So when I is 1, we end up at 87. That's how far down from the top we are for the first category. And then each time I increases by 1, that'll move us down 1 category. So this draws the piece of text for everything in the upper section. we call the get upper total, so that's going to get us the total of all the scored categories in the upper section. We store that in a variable that we call upper total, and it draws a piece of text in the appropriate spot for the upper total. So if I run this, and I'm just going to select one player. That upper total is this number here. Now notice these are all set to -1 right now, so they don't display. The upper total isn't just the sum of them all, it's the sum of everything that is not equal to -1. So you start out a variable at 0, and each time you go through a section you say, if it's not equal to -1, then add it to into that variable that you started out at 0. Call that variable sum or something. When you get to the bottom, sum is equal to the sum of all of the non-1 categories in the upper section. So this line of code right here is drawing the upper total in this little box. And then it says if the upper total is greater than or equal to 63. So this is calculating the bonus. So if this total is greater than or equal to 63, we want to put a 35 in here and increase the total by 35. So if the upper total is greater than or equal to 63, we derive a new font that's just a little bit smaller than our 30 because our space for that bonus is a little bit smaller. So this one is going to be about 20 pixels high. And then we draw a string that is a 35 in the appropriate spot. Okay, this is the column, and this is the Y location of this little bonus category. And then it sets the font back to this F1, the bigger size of 30, so that all of these other things we do when we draw text end up being big. This is the only one that we want to be 20 pixels high. And then it'll increase this upper total by 35 points. So then we draw the upper total in the second category down here. We're going to draw it down here. So we draw first the total of all these sections, which right now is 0. And then if it's greater than or equal to 63, we'll show a little bonus here, and we'll draw in this. So because this is not greater than or equal to 63, we're not adding in any bonus. But if it was, we would have this value equal to that value plus 35. And so this is the upper total with the bonus. We calculate the lower total, okay, and we've got a function that does that, and then we draw a piece of text for the upper total. Or, I'm sorry, the lower total. And so this line of code draws this piece of text here, which is the sum of all of these categories. And then we draw the upper total again. So this number just gets drawn in two places. This line of code is exactly the same as this line of code, except that the Y value is a little bit different. So this total just gets copied down. It's the total of the upper half. Okay? And then this last number is the sum of the upper total and lower total. Now, there's an interesting little thing that I did here. I've got a set of parentheses. And you might want to know, why is that set of parentheses there? Well, Java will work from left to right, and it'll follow orders of precedence. Remember, multiplication and division get done before addition and subtraction. But these are both plus symbols. They have equal precedence, and since this one is on the left, it would try to do this one first, which would take this string, and it would look at this int. It would convert this int to a string and append it to the end. And then it would do this one, taking the result, which is that string with the upper total, and then it would convert the lower total to the string and append it to the end of that. So you see the two numbers, if without the parentheses, you'd just see the two numbers smashed together next to each other, but I didn't want that. I wanted the sum of the two. So by putting the parentheses around this little calculation, it forces it to do this calculation, this, before it does this one. So it adds the two integers together and then converts that sum to a string. And so it's really important to have those parentheses in place. And then, so that's the first parameter to the draw string, and then the second parameter is the x value, which you see is the same as here, the same as here. That's a calculation for the appropriate column. It might have been a good idea for me to do that calculation up here, say like column x, and then just use that one variable multiple times rather than redoing the same calculation over and over and over. But I was a little bit lazy. This is an example of code that works. It is not necessarily an example of the best way to program, okay? But then the y value is the y value of the grand total, which is the sum of the lower and upper half. And then this last bit of code, if 3 of a kind is not -1, then draw this text in the category for 3 of a kind. If 4 of a kind is not -1, then draw the text for 4 of a kind, and so on for full house, small straight, large straight, Yahtzee, and chance. So that's the paint method, and we've already described briefly place dice. You're going to write get upper total and get lower total. You're going to, and I'll create a video that describes in a little bit better detail how to do that. When I give you the code, I'll have some comments here to help you with some tips. I've already described that we ignore mouse release, mouse clicked, mouse entered, and mouse exited. Mouse pressed needs a good explanation. So that'll be the next video. Part 3 will describe mouse pressed.